Hi, I'm Katie, and this is a tutorial on adding a sparkling crystal briolette edging to your cross-stitch finishes, whether that is a hard-edged ornament like I have here. I'm going to be demonstrating on Fox and Rabbit's Elizabeth Cheevan's pink cape, or on a soft pillow as shown on Cardinal Kin. Adding the briolette edging as seen here is really easy, so I will be doing a practical how-to, but before we get to that, I'm going to start with a few style points on this by showing you some of my past finishes and the variations that you can get with this finish. We're going to start with the actual material itself. What is a briolette? A briolette is a donut-shaped crystal which you attach to the edge of a finish by threading on and then adding a little seed bead at the top to hold it on, as I will demonstrate in this finish. I really like a 4mm crystal briolette as seen here on Cardinal Kin. That's usually my most common choice because it's a very delicate edging. It's very easy to do. Kits for Cardinal Kin with or without the beading add-on are currently available at the time of filming in my shop, which I will link in the description. But briolettes come in a range of colors and sizes, so I'm just going to show you some of the other ones I've done. This is by no means all, and I encourage you to explore all the options here. So this is a finish of Prairie Schooler Santa's Night. Again, I have done a 4mm briolette on the edge of an ornament, spaced the same as Cardinal Kin. As you can see, it's the exact same method, but this is a clear color crystal, an hard-edged ornament. You can also use larger briolettes like I'm doing today, although I'm going to space these a little further apart than I did here. This is one of the motifs from Christmas Garden, and I've used a 6mm briolette color Crystal Golden Shadow, which goes beautifully with the linen here, Fuller's Teasel. And that just adds a kind of tonal, beautiful, very sparkly finish to my tree. However, so those are spaced 1/2 inch apart. Today, I think I'm going to space them a little wider. So one thing to keep in mind is that I'll show you what I usually do, but you can play with this, put things closer together, further apart, play with different sizes, colors. I like to do tonal beads at the top to hold them on, but you could do a larger contrast bead. Really, the sky's the limit here. So these are 2 ornament finishes, sizes 4mm briolette, size 6mm briolette. And I will include sources for seed beads and briolettes in the description as well. And then this is Stacy Nash Good Witch Pin Keep. So the details on all the finishes that I am showing here will also be in the description, so you can go back and find these if you like. This is a variation called a knife edge briolette, also sometimes known as a round dell. It's the same shape, but it's got this knife edge to it, which is very detailed, very fun, and I really enjoy that variation. That comes in much fewer colors than the others, but that can be a fun thing to play with too. So you have roundels, you have briolettes in different sizes and colors, and you can play with spacing, size, what bead you use to hold it on, all to vary your effect. So having looked at some of the different variations I've done in the past, let's look at what I am going to do today and what you need to do this tutorial. So I am demonstrating on my finish of Fox and Rabbit Elizabeth Cheevan's pinwheel from their sampler box. This was, I believe, exclusive to the box, and the pattern won't be released in future, but it's a really beautiful little ornament and it's going to go perfectly with the crystals I have picked out for it. This is a 6mm, so the larger size of the ones I discussed, color light rose, which is going to pick up that rich pink right there in the center. So my ornament's already been fully finished front and back, and that's when I like to add the edging. So the good news on this is that If you've got a past finish that you'd like to jazz up, it's the perfect time to do it. You don't have to have, you don't do it while, like before the back is on or anything. Sorry, that wasn't very eloquently put. So to do this, you need your finished piece, whether that's a soft edge pillow or a hard edged ornament. This is laced over padded mat board, so it's got a hard and inflexible edge there. You need your ornament. You need briolets of your choice and seed beads. I'm using a size 15 seed bead. And if beads and crystals are new to you, you can watch the beginning to my beaded spiral rope trim tutorial, which has a whole primer on types of beads, sizes, finishes, etc., etc. And then you'll need a sewing thread. I'm using a Soie 103, color 217. I really like 103 for finishing, as I've said many times before, because the smoothness makes finishing easier, but silk is very strong. So it's a great choice for finishing. So I'm going to be using a nice long length of 103. Scissors, of course, and then a ruler and something to mark with. You're going to want to mark out your spacing. And then you'll also need a finishing needle. And what you need depends on what type of piece you're adding this to. So for something with a soft edge like a pillow, I use a number 10 milliner's needle, because then you can just kind of scoop in and dig. So a straight needle works just fine there. For a hard edge, like my ornament here, I'm going to use a curved beading needle. This allows you to get through the edge of the ornament much more easily, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead, cut a nice long length, and I like to work with very long lengths just because then I don't have to change threads often, but never work with a longer length than you can successfully manage. It doesn't help you at all if you've got more thread than you can really use. It would help if I could thread my thread into my needle. That's what I'm trying to do here off camera and having a really unsuccessful time with that. Okay, here we go. So, threaded the needle. And since this ornament is already finished front and back, that means I need to hide my start. So what I'm doing is I am going to just double knot the end of this, and then we're going to pop this inside the finish. Another important point to consider: where do you start? It might seem logical to start right at the top, but on a round, I actually like to start bottom and off to the side. The reason for that is because your desired spacing may not go evenly around the entire exterior. So if you've got a kind of odd size gap, you're going to see that more if it's right here at the top. The eye will kind of overlook it if it's over off center to the side. So I'm going to start right around here. And this is where a curved beading needle comes in very handy. So I'm going to slip this in between my slip stitches, trying not to catch the fabric until I'm in underneath, if that makes sense. You don't want your knot to be stuck right here on the outside. And then I'm going to wiggle that up to the surface, or I'm going to try and wiggle. There we go. Okay. Wiggling up to the surface, and I'm coming up on my linen edge here because that's a little wider. It's going to be easier for me to maneuver. So I'm gonna pull through, and then I'm just going to pop that knot inside. And because I left a long tail that's poking out, you could clip that, or you can also just take the blunt edge of a needle and slip that right in. Now, of course, you do still have a knot at the end of that. That's not super secure, so I'm going to do one more thing here to make my start secure, and I am going to take a single locking stitch. So I'm going to go through just like one linen thread. I'm all thumbs today. Can't do anything I say I'm going to do. Okay, going through one linen thread, pulling that through. That should lock my thread so I can pull on it when I'm attaching the briolettes without popping that knot through and making my start all bad. You don't want your edging to come off. So now we're actually going to get to the briolette edging. I'm going to thread on a briolette, and I'm going to thread on my seed bead. And then I'm going to go back through the hole of the briolette. Like so. I'm going to come down right next to where I came up. And so now I kind of have to decide how far apart do I want to space these. I'm thinking a little further than usual, so maybe like right about there. I find it helpful to have a mark so that you know what spot you're trying to hit. So that's a little short of 3/4. I think I'm going to space these 3/4 inches apart, and then we'll see how that looks. So did I mention I've got a Bohin chalk pencil to mark with my ruler? I hope I mentioned all of that in supplies needed. If not, there will be a complete list. So keep in mind when you are planning your marking, the distance listed in the description. So I'm going to tell you what I used for distances on past finishes as well. So for the 4mm briolettes, that's 1/2 inch on Crystal Kin, and that's center to center, not the distance between the edge of the briolettes, if that makes sense, because where your needle is coming up is actually the center of the bead. So I'm going to pull that through. Try and pull that through. For all of that, it's so smooth and makes finishing easier. I've promptly managed to knot my thread on camera. Oh, great. And then I broke it. Technical difficulties will come back in just a minute. And we're back. So I'm having one of those days. I'm knotting my thread, I can't throw up my needle, and just because that's real life, I'm leaving all of this in. You're gonna see my screw ups as well as my successes. Just to clarify what I did there, because that was right at the start. I just ended up clipping the thread, restarting, I knotted the end of my thread, I buried it, and then locked it as we saw in the first part of this video. And then now I have come up at my next marked point, which is 3/4 inches from my first point. I'm going to thread on a bead, and I'm going to see how I like that distance. Yeah, I think that's going to be nice. So before I go ahead and thread that on, I'm going to go ahead and mark my next couple of spots so I can just proceed. What I will do after that is go ahead and mark all the way around so I know if I need to cheat any of these points closer together when I come back around, but we'll cover that in just a minute. So I've marked my next few spots, and we will watch me repeat this process. Seriously, this is so easy. All you really need to do is buy your materials and you will be off and running. So I've threaded on my briolette, and as before, I'm threading on my seed bead, and then I'm going back down through the center of the briolette. I'm taking my needle down through the edge, right next to where it came up. And then I'm going to come up, or try to, at my mark. One thing about the wider distance here, and then the curve of the ornament and the curve of the needle, is that it's actually a little hard to get that all the way to 3/4. So what I've done is I've actually come up short, and this time I'm going to try not to knot my thread. to try and pull a long one through with it threaded on like this. That does happen. So instead, I'm going to be smart here, and I'm going to use one hand to hold the bead and briolette out nice so they don't tangle, and the other hand to pull that through. So as you can see here, I am short of my 3/4 inch mark. That's fine. I'm using a thread that's really close to my linen here. And that means that I can just go down through the same hole I came up through, I can't talk either. This tutorial might be cursed. And now I'm just going to take a second step so that I hit my mark and then I'm at the right spot for my next briolette. I'm starting to think the reason I usually do 1/2 inch is because it's easy to get to with your curved needle on an edge. So, gonna repeat this one more time, and then I am going to go ahead and mark the rest of my briolette spacing. So I've threaded on my briolette. I've added a seed bead. Going back down. And I'm coming back up as far as my needle will take me. I'm probably gonna have to take 2 needle passes between each of the briolettes here, but that's okay. And then see how that's looping at the base? That's because I need to just pull up on the seed bead, and then don't be afraid to tug nice and tight just to make sure that you want it to sit flush against your edge. So I am going to mark all the way around my ornament, and then I'll come back and show you if I needed to compensate at all. Okay, so I've made my marks all the way around, and I did need to compensate a little bit. And just, again, so I kind of loosened the briolettes as I was pushing down, making my marks. So always make sure that you're tightening as necessary. And keep in mind that especially when you're marking around a round, this is not an exact science. I use a fairly flexible plastic ruler, but it's not that easy to get exact marks. So as you may be able to see, the spacing on these 3 isn't perfectly even. That's fine. So I went around marking at regular intervals, and then when I got here, I found that I was going to be a little short, so I took these last 2 and then I just cheated them in opposite directions to give the illusion of even spacing. So this mark and this mark are my corrected marks to try and get that to look a little more even, but because this is off center, you're really not going to see the very marginal difference there. And my multiple marks will be covered by the briolette, which sits very neatly over them. Now, note that this is for a round. If you are doing a rectangle, you're going to start at one of the corners and then work out any compensating issues on each edge as you get there. I hope that makes sense. So now I'm going to just continue by threading on a couple more briolettes just so that we're all super clear. I mean, I think this is very easy, but this is a tutorial, so I am demonstrating. So I'm taking my second pass with the needle to get back into position. And yeah, you can't see that at all. So if there's anything you take from this, it's that this is very forgiving. What you're ultimately going to see are pretty sparkling crystals and not any imperfections in spacing, or I had to take an extra stitch to get the needle up that far easily. Not a big deal at all. So coming back down, I've threaded on my briolette. Yeah, that's as far as my needle wants to go this time. So, and I'm just trying to keep my thread from tangling, pulling that tight. And then I'm going to go back down and up. You can really wiggle with the curved beading needles to make sure that you're ultimately ending up in the right position. So I'm going to continue going around off camera, and then I'll come back to you for the last briolette to show how I finish this off. Okay, I'm back and we are almost done. Does this look jazzy and fabulous or what? I love it. I think the slightly larger crystal on this particular piece with a little more distance between them makes for a really effective finish. This was a beautiful ornament before, but I think those just little pops of bright, luscious pink have finished this off gloriously and really brought it alive. So my last crystal, I have threaded on a briolette, I have threaded on a seed bead, I've come back down, and then I'm just going to take my needle through. We're gonna look at how to end this. Naturally, once I was off camera, I didn't tangle my thread, I didn't knot my thread, I didn't slip my needle. That only seems to happen when I'm on camera. But I am not a professional finisher. I'm not a perfect finisher. I make mistakes just like anybody else, and you're gonna see those in my tutorials. Take heart, you can be human and still get fabulous, fabulous finishes. So I took just a little tacking stitch where I came up, and then I just brought my needle up again. I'm trying to stay close to where the linen and the backing meet. This is how I'm going to hide my stitches. So I've made sure that those final briolettes are drawn down nice and tight. And I'm just going to take some tacking stitches like I'm slip stitching the back of the ornament to the front for the finishing process. This helps me hide my stitches, and these extra stitches I'm taking are what are going to secure the thread for me. So I'm just taking some tacking stitches, as many as you like. It's a little better to go overkill than have fewer on this, just because the crystals are heavy. They can take some stress and wear. So the more stitches you have, the more secure your thread will be, and the less chance you'll have that those briolettes are going to loosen or pull loose over time. So I've taken several tacking stitches, and now I'm feeling like, okay, yeah, that's probably secure. So I'm gonna bring my needle up one last time. Sure everything's nice and tight. Clip that right at the base, and look at that, it looks amazing. So these aren't quite evenly spaced. This is where I compensated, but again, you can't tell at all, especially not when that is going to be hanging off the tree. That does bring me to one final point I realized I forgot to discuss in the introduction, which is calculating what you need for this finish. How many beads and briolettes. Basically what you need to know for that is what size briolette are you using, the dimensions of your finish, and how far apart you're going to space them. So for this, I would measure the entire exterior edge of my finish, whether that's a round, a square, a rectangle, whatever, and then I would have to make my decision. What size briolette? So here I've got a 4, and a 6, and what's my spacing? So again, I used 1/2 inch each on these, so that would be 2 briolettes per inch of the exterior line of the finish, or on this, 1 briolette for every 3/4 of an inch of the finish, or 2 briolettes for every 1.5 inches of the exterior line of the finish. So that would be how you know what you need. And as I said, you can get so many different effects with this depending on size, spacing, and contrast. So on Santa's Night, this is just like a little extra accent. The clear adds a little touch of sparkle when it's on the tree, but it's just kind of reinforcing what's already there. Cardinal Kin, I've gone with red, again, which is a strong contrast against the Druid blue of this finish. And then I'm kind of in between on Elizabeth Cheven's. I've used what I might call a highlight shade, which is a pink that really echoes this highlight element here in the ornament, but it's not too far off the ground fabric, and so it adds a little pop, but it isn't quite as contrast, I would say, as, you know, Cardinal Kin. And then again, in thinking about size, here I've gone for slightly larger beads. I've spaced them a little further apart, and I think that suits this particular finish really well. So consider what size fits your finish, what spacing fits your finish, and how much contrast you want in your edging. However, this is, as you can see, a finishing technique with a lot of potential. These are only some of the ones I've done. There are many more on my tree, and I think the possibilities are endless. I hope you'll tag me and share your finishes. I'm at Strachan Embroidery on Instagram. Enjoy and happy stitching.